Hello and welcome. Tonight, we travel slowly back in time to Europe in 1495, a world of discovery, art, and a shadow of disease. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video if you enjoy being here, and subscribe for more journeys through history. I'd love to know where you are listening from, the time it is for you, and your country. Leave it in the comments. It's fascinating to see who joins us tonight. Now, dim the lights, turn on a gentle fan if you like, and take a deep, slow breath. Imagine stepping into streets paved with cobblestones, the smell of wood smoke, and the sea in the air. Life is vibrant, the Renaissance is in bloom, and yet an unseen danger is on the horizon. You walk slowly, feeling the rhythm of a city unaware that a mysterious illness is about to arrive, a disease that will shape history and touch every level of society. Tonight, we follow its story, one quiet step at a time. You awaken in Naples in February 1495. The air carries the briny scent of the sea mixed with wood smoke and the subtle spices of merchants' stalls. Narrow streets bustle with life, merchants shout, children dart between carts, and soldiers parade in their bright uniforms. The French army has just captured the city, and celebrations echo in every square. Wine flows freely, laughter mingles with music, and for now, all seems bright and chaotic. Yet, something unseen stirs among the soldiers, an invisible shadow that will soon spread pain and fear. Locals whisper warnings, wary of the occupying army's presence, but no one truly knows what lies ahead. You walk past the market, noticing men and women who seem lively and well, unaware that in a few weeks, some will be stricken with sores, fevers, and bone-deep pain. The city hums with life, yet beneath it, the seeds of an epidemic are quietly planted. The French army is like a small city on the move. Swiss pikemen, German lanzknechts, Spanish swordsmen, and Italian crossbowmen march together, camp followers trailing behind. Cooks, servants, and women accompany them, all celebrating the victory with a mixture of relief and indulgence. Soldiers drink, dance, and laugh, unaware that some will soon develop strange, painful sores. Night brings carousing in taverns and inns, the air thick with wine and smoke. Locals glance nervously at the foreign troops, sensing trouble, but cannot foresee the invisible plague that travels with them. You notice the fatigue in the men's eyes, the calloused hands of the mercenaries, the constant murmur of conversation mixing with the clatter of hooves and wheels. Life seems energetic, almost festive, yet a shadow stretches over Naples, moving silently from soldier to soldier. By spring, rumors spread among Neapolitan citizens. Some soldiers have sores that will not heal, starting in intimate places and slowly covering the body. Fevers, fatigue, and nights of torment follow, with cries echoing in the barracks. The locals whisper of a French disease, blaming foreigners for the new suffering. Scholars and physicians debate its origins. Some link it to voyages across the Atlantic, while others claim it has always existed in Europe, quietly evolving. You walk through streets where fear mixes with curiosity. Merchants glance at strangers with suspicion, children avoid sickly neighbors, and priests warn of divine punishment. The disease seems indiscriminate, touching the rich and poor, the soldier and the noble. Already, you sense its subtle grip on the social fabric, a shadow creeping along trade routes, marketplaces, and crowded taverns, following the footsteps of those unaware they carry it. You find lodging at a modest inn near the harbor. The room is small but tidy, a straw mattress, a candle, and a chamber pot in the corner. Downstairs, the common room is warm, lit by a fire, filled with sailors swapping tales of distant lands. Some speak of men who returned from the New World with mysterious sores, bone-deep aches, and restless nights. You listen quietly, absorbing first-hand accounts of a disease that has begun to spread unnoticed. The innkeeper serves salted fish and bread, murmuring about the soldiers and their strange complaints. As night falls, you watch the harbor lights flicker on the water. The sea laps gently against the docks, contrasting the turmoil within the city. The distant cries of men and the whispers of merchants create a rhythm, a subtle reminder that life continues even as an unseen illness begins its slow, inexorable spread. Weeks later, you leave Naples for Rome. Travel is slow and difficult, walking or riding along rough roads, wary of bandits. You join a merchant caravan for safety, moving through hills, valleys, and forests. Along the way, conversations turn to the mysterious illness. Travelers speak of soldiers, sailors, and merchants carrying sores and fevers to their homes. In Rome, anxiety grows. Pope Alexander VI warns that the disease is divine punishment, framing it as moral retribution. Towns begin isolating the sick, some in rudimentary hospices, others banished to the outskirts. Physicians follow ancient humoral theory, offering bloodletting, purging, and sweating therapies, often with little relief. The disease spreads quietly but swiftly, its path traced by returning travelers and soldiers. You walk slowly through ancient streets, listening to the echo of distant bells, feeling the tension beneath the city's grandeur, sensing that nothing will be quite the same again. In Rome, you witness the early medical response. Towns establish isolation wards, religious orders care for the sick, and physicians follow the teachings of Galen, balancing the four humors through bleeding, purging, and ointments. Mercury is applied in hopes of curing the new disease, though it brings suffering of its own. Fear spreads faster than knowledge, whispers of morality, sin, and divine wrath circulating among citizens. You notice families avoiding the ill, merchants hesitating to sell to strangers, and priests offering prayers and blessings. Public squares, once lively, feel tense, the energy of daily life subdued. Disease reshapes behavior subtly but powerfully. You walk slowly among the citizens, observing gestures of caution and superstition, feeling the weight of invisible fear pressing against every street corner and doorway. By winter, you arrive in Florence. The Renaissance city hums with creativity, yet the shadow of the disease touches even its most vibrant corners. Artists like Botticelli are influenced, turning from joyful and sensual works to somber religious themes. You assist Dr. Lorenzo Beni, an unusual physician performing autopsies to understand the disease. He notes its three stages: a painless sore, a widespread rash, and later, devastating effects on heart, brain, and bones. Mercury treatments bring profuse salivation, tooth loss, and tremors, sometimes worsening the patient's suffering. Citizens whisper about morality, and social behaviors adapt to fear. Markets, baths, and public spaces are treated with caution. You observe Florence quietly, the brilliance of art contrasting with the suffering quietly growing, understanding that human creativity and fear exist side by side. Spring arrives, and you journey north across the Alps to Augsburg. Snow still clings to high passes, forests stretch endlessly, and the Rhine winds through valleys. Around campfires, travelers discuss the epidemic. Some see it as divine punishment, others blame humoral imbalance or foreign contagion. In Augsburg, city authorities isolate the sick, guilds mark those afflicted, and religious orders offer care. Traditional remedies are applied: mercury, herbal baths, prayers, and dietary regimens, yet relief is rare. Social hierarchies shape vulnerability. The wealthy retreat to country estates. The poor live in overcrowded quarters, exposed to contagion. Streets feel quieter than in Italy. You sense the disease shaping society as much as it touches bodies, leaving an invisible trace across trade routes, markets, and neighborhoods. By early summer, you continue to Heidelberg, a university town documenting the epidemic. Scholars and students debate its stages: primary sores, secondary rashes, tertiary afflictions years later. Some believe it is new, others claim it is a virulent form of leprosy or a corruption of humors. Treatments remain limited, observations and record-keeping are the primary tools. You walk among young scholars, listening to their careful debates, sensing a shift in medical thought. Theoretical knowledge begins to mix with empirical observation. Towns below feel the disease differently. Families fall ill together, rituals are performed for protection, and healers provide herbs for temporary relief. Here, intellect and fear mingle, shaping both understanding and social norms. As spring deepens, you leave Heidelberg behind, traveling with a small merchant convoy down the Neckar Valley. The river reflects the gentle sunlight, and vineyards stretch along the hillsides, heavy with early grapes. Villages dot the landscape, smoke curling from chimneys. Conversations around the convoy turn to the persistent disease. Some villagers speak of protective herbs hung on doorways. Others whisper prayers to saints, hoping for divine mercy. You notice that even here, the epidemic shapes daily routines. Children play less freely in the streets, neighbors speak in cautious tones, and merchants handle coins and goods with extra care. Every turn of the path reminds you that life continues, but beneath it, fear and vigilance travel silently, alongside commerce and conversation. The journey continues north toward Strasbourg. Forests open into rolling fields, dotted with sheep and horses. The air smells of damp earth and freshly tilled soil. Caravans pass slowly over worn roads, horses' hooves striking the cobblestones. At night, you sleep under the stars, listening to the wind rustle the trees. Conversations turn again to the epidemic. Some travelers blame the French armies, others say the alignment of the stars has worsened health. Religious figures pray aloud for protection. Despite these fears, people continue to move, trade must flow, children must eat, and life cannot pause. You feel the tension between necessity and caution, seeing the disease's invisible hand influence every decision along this long, quiet journey. After days of travel, the border approaches. Signs of French influence appear, road markers, inns with French signage, the accent in voices shifting gradually. Villages are larger here, fields more intensively cultivated. You hear whispers of outbreaks in Paris and smaller towns along the Rhine. Travelers bring news of infected soldiers returning from Naples and Italian campaigns. Some villagers are skeptical, others fearful, locking doors at night. Priests hold processions, seeking divine intervention, while healers offer herbal remedies. You walk slowly through these settlements, noticing how social practices adapt. Even greetings are cautious, hands are kept apart, and children observe the unease of adults. The epidemic is everywhere, subtle but persistent. The Rhine carries you and the merchant convoy closer to Paris. Barges laden with wine, grain, and cloth glide along the slow, muddy waters. The air is damp and smells faintly of river weeds and fish. Along the banks, travelers discuss the epidemic in hushed tones. Wealthier merchants ensure that infected individuals stay away from towns, while peasants whisper tales of family members suffering and dying quietly in isolated homes. The disease follows the routes of trade, carried silently from town to town. Each bend in the river brings more signs of vigilance. Watchful guards at bridges, quarantined boats, and marketplaces with stricter rules. Life presses onward, even as fear and careful observation shape human behavior. As you near Paris, the city rises like a misty silhouette over the distant hills. Smoke from hundreds of chimneys hangs above clustered roofs. Travelers mention outbreaks in suburbs and royal estates. Streets are crowded yet careful. Citizens greet each other cautiously, merchants cover their coins with cloth, and inns request travelers from affected regions to stay outside city walls temporarily. News reaches you of wealthy courtiers quietly sent to estates to recover, leaving wards of poorer citizens filled with those less fortunate. You notice that fear and wealth are intertwined. Those with means have privacy, while the less privileged endure both disease and public scrutiny. The shadow of the French disease touches all, yet differently. Walking into Paris, the narrow streets feel alive and tense. Horses clatter over cobblestones, vendors shout over each other, and children weave among carts. Market squares are less lively than in Italy, as merchants take precautions. The Latin Quarter buzzes with students, scholars, and printers, exchanging knowledge and gossip. You hear debates about the French disease. Is it a corruption of humors, a divine punishment, or a new contagion brought from distant lands? In small inns, merchants whisper about treatments, mercury ointments, herbal concoctions, and imported remedies. Even in a bustling city, life is tinged with caution, every interaction influenced by the epidemic's invisible presence. You visit the University of Paris, a hub of learning. Scholars debate the disease's stages, causes, and potential cures. Younger physicians experiment cautiously with mercury treatments, herbal compounds, and observations drawn from Italian methods. Students discuss symptoms, patterns, and social implications. Many still adhere to Galen's humoral theory, yet empirical observation is gaining attention. You listen carefully, understanding that these discussions are shaping future medicine. Knowledge flows alongside fear, and observation begins to challenge ancient authority. The city hums with learning, but the disease quietly reminds everyone that human understanding has limits. At the Hôtel Dieu, Paris's ancient hospital near Notre Dame, you witness the epidemic firsthand. Long wards house patients, often 2 or 3 to a bed. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, herbal remedies, and fever. Nuns move efficiently, distributing food and care, while physicians make brief rounds. A separate ward houses those with the French disease. Patients suffer painful sores, fevers, and fatigue. Treatments follow humoral principles with bleeding, poultices, and herbal baths. Mercury applications are common, sometimes worsening their condition. You move slowly among the beds, noting the humanity and suffering present in every gesture and every whispered word. In the city's Mari district, apothecaries display remedies for the wealthy, guaiacum wood from the New World, mercury ointments, and expensive herbal mixtures. Some pills contain gold leaf or pearl powder, intended to purify the blood. For ordinary citizens, simpler remedies prevail: herbal infusions, poultices, and prayers. Social norms shift, public baths close, handshakes become cautious, and greetings grow distant. Even the exchange of coins carries anxiety. Wealth offers privacy and remedies, but the disease touches all. You walk slowly through the streets, observing how fear transforms everyday behavior, altering the rhythm of life and reshaping social interaction. As evening falls, you sit on a balcony overlooking the Seine. Lanterns glimmer in the water, and distant bells echo across the rooftops. Conversations of scholars, merchants, and travelers drift on the wind, mixing hope, curiosity, and fear. You reflect on the journey from Naples to Paris, the cities and countryside traversed, and the countless ways the epidemic has touched every aspect of life: art, medicine, religion, and social customs. Despite suffering and loss, life continues. People adapt, observe, and seek understanding. In this moment, you realize the epidemic is not just a disease of the body, but a force shaping history, slowly, quietly, like the steady flow of the river beneath you. You wander into the elegant quarters of Parisian nobles, where luxury is abundant but vigilance is constant. Servants move quietly through candlelit corridors, offering remedies, herbal infusions, and comforting words to their masters. The French disease has reached the court, yet secrecy prevails. Nobles who fall ill are discreetly moved to private estates or isolated chambers. Courtiers whisper rumors and gossip, fearful that any exposure could tarnish reputations. Even here, life continues with music, banquets, and reading. Yet beneath the lavish surface, fear lingers, subtly influencing alliances, marriages, and daily interactions. You sense that disease has reshaped the rhythm of courtly life, dictating caution even amid elegance and indulgence. Back in the bustling streets, you notice a city adjusting to constant vigilance. Market stalls are orderly, coins are handled carefully, gloves and cloths are common. Street vendors speak in hushed tones about new cases in distant neighborhoods. Children play in smaller groups, often under watchful eyes. Public spaces like baths and taverns are quieter than before. Travelers entering the city are questioned about their origins, and some are temporarily denied entry. You realize the epidemic has rewritten the unspoken rules of urban life: who can touch whom, where to gather, and how to exchange goods. Even casual gestures are measured, every action subtly shaped by fear and experience. You visit a printer in the Latin Quarter, Johannes Meer, whose workshop produces pamphlets about the French disease. Ink-stained hands carefully carve wooden blocks to illustrate sores and rashes. The printed pages describe remedies, theories, and first-hand accounts of illness. Students and scholars gather to read, compare observations, and debate. Despite limited medical understanding, the spread of information offers hope. People clench these small documents like lifelines, seeking guidance and reassurance. You witness knowledge as a form of protection, a fragile shield against fear, even as it slowly changes the way Europeans understand disease and the body. You step into an apothecary, fragrant with herbs, resins, and exotic woods. Shelves display remedies imported from distant lands, guaiacum wood from the Americas, spices from India, and mercury preparations. A clerk carefully mixes powders, explaining which treatments are thought effective at each stage of the disease. The wealthy purchase expensive pills containing gold and pearls, believing in their purifying power. Locals watch from the doorway, unable to afford such luxuries, relying instead on simpler herbal concoctions. You note how class and access define survival. The epidemic touches everyone, but privilege dictates the ability to shield oneself from its worst effects. Seeking quiet, you enter a small chapel near Notre Dame. Candles flicker in the dim light. Locals kneel in prayer, asking for protection from the French disease. A priest sprinkles holy water over the faithful, offering blessings and absolution. The air is heavy with incense, murmurs, and devotion. In these moments, you feel the intersection of faith and fear. Spiritual rituals provide solace even if they cannot cure. Villagers, merchants, and nobles alike participate, each seeking reassurance that divine mercy might temper the relentless spread of this mysterious affliction. You notice how religious practice shapes behavior, guiding decisions about movement, hygiene, and social contact. As night falls, Paris becomes quieter. Lanterns cast gentle pools of light on cobblestones. The sounds of merchants, animals, and voices fade, leaving only distant bells and the occasional clatter of a horse. People retreat indoors, aware that disease spreads most easily where crowds gather. In your small inn, you listen to the city breathe, feeling the tension and resilience intermingled. Through narrow windows, you glimpse families eating simple dinners, students reading by candlelight, and guards patrolling empty streets. The city is alive yet subdued, its pulse slowed by fear but persistent in rhythm, a testament to human adaptation. During the day, you join students and scholars in the Latin Quarter, discussing observations of the French disease. They describe the stages, note seasonal fluctuations, and compare reports from Italian, German, and French cities. Some speculate on causes: humoral imbalance, divine punishment, or contagion brought from distant lands. Despite uncertainty, the approach is systematic: observation, documentation, and discussion. You notice the gradual shift from blind adherence to classical authority toward empirical reasoning. Even as fear persists, curiosity and careful recording of facts begin shaping the foundations of modern medicine. Walking through the narrow alleys of Paris, you see the epidemic's harshest toll. Poor families live in cramped, damp rooms. Children cling to parents weakened by illness. Public bathhouses are closed, and sanitation is limited. Herbal remedies and folk practices are common, though many suffer without relief. You notice how social hierarchy mediates exposure. Wealth offers options, the poor endure suffering in public view. Yet even here, community support persists. Neighbors care for each other when able, offering food, firewood, or basic remedies. You see that resilience and compassion persist even amid fear, shaping human responses as much as medicine itself. You visit the royal court, where Louis XII holds audience. Courtiers speak discreetly of the epidemic. Those infected are quietly sent to estates or isolated chambers. Physicians advise moderation, hygiene, and avoidance of excess. Even kings and nobles are touched, though secrecy shields them from public scrutiny. Despite wealth and access to remedies, uncertainty lingers. Discussions at court reflect both fear and curiosity, blending practical care with social strategy. You realize that disease influences power and politics as much as health, quietly reshaping alliances, priorities, and perceptions of authority. At dusk, you stand atop a bridge overlooking the Seine. Lanterns shimmer on the water, and voices drift from distant streets. You reflect on the contrast between wealth and poverty, knowledge and ignorance, faith and science. The epidemic shapes every layer of society: hospitals, streets, homes, and courts. People adapt in small, deliberate ways, avoiding crowds, isolating the sick, seeking remedies, or finding comfort in rituals. The city breathes in cautious rhythm, a blend of fear, resilience, and hope. You understand that life continues, guided by both necessity and innovation, even under the shadow of an invisible threat that will shape history for decades. As autumn settles over Paris, you leave the city with a small caravan of merchants and travelers. The streets grow quieter as the season progresses, and the chill in the air reminds you that winter approaches. Villagers along the road offer small gifts of bread or fresh produce, and travelers speak cautiously of the French disease. Tales of families afflicted in rural estates reach your ears, emphasizing that no distance shields one entirely. You notice how the disease follows trade and travel, silently moving along rivers, roads, and paths. Every village, every crossing, carries a story, subtle yet pervasive, shaping both fear and human behavior. The landscape shifts into rolling fields, dense forests, and isolated hamlets. Smoke curls from chimneys as families prepare for winter. Shepherds guide flocks, farmers harvest root vegetables, and children watch from doorways. Discussions around the epidemic vary. Some insist it is divine punishment, others believe in contagion. Folk healers mix herbal remedies with prayers, often giving temporary relief. The spread is slower than in cities, yet when the disease reaches a hamlet, it moves swiftly among household members. You see how isolation, distance, and caution shape its path, and how the rhythms of rural life persist, quiet but enduring, under the epidemic's shadow. You pass through small towns along the Seine and Loire. Barges unload goods at modest docks, and inns accommodate travelers wary of contagion. Townspeople speak softly of infected relatives and returning soldiers. Local authorities impose quarantines, isolating the sick in rudimentary hospices. Herbal treatments are common, with remedies such as willow bark, sassafras, and mustard poultices applied for fever and aches. Children learn early to avoid the sick, and markets operate under cautious observation. You feel the tension between continuity and caution. Life continues, yet each step is measured against the invisible threat that shadows every interaction. Traveling with a merchant caravan, you see how trade persists despite fear. Caravans move slowly, laden with textiles, wine, and grain. Merchants carry information about disease outbreaks from town to town, unintentionally spreading awareness and fear. Some travelers insist on inspecting packs for contamination, others avoid contact altogether. At night, by campfires, merchants share news of quarantines, deaths, and remedies. The epidemic shapes commerce as much as health. Prices rise, routes change, and social trust is tested. Even in movement, the disease subtly dictates behavior, altering routines and decisions in ways both visible and invisible. Entering Burgundy, you notice vineyards stretching along gentle slopes, producing rich wines destined for European markets. Villages are modest but orderly. Monasteries provide care for the sick, combining prayer, herbal remedies, and basic nourishment. Farmers discuss the French disease in hushed tones, noting symptoms in distant towns or among returning soldiers. The rhythm of rural life continues, yet with heightened vigilance. Social customs adjust. Neighbors leave food at doorsteps, communal gatherings are smaller, and the sick are discreetly cared for or isolated. You recognize that adaptation is a hallmark of human response to persistent threat. Stopping at a small inn, you notice how travel accommodations have changed. Rooms are smaller, beds spaced apart, and inns post warnings about travelers from affected regions. Meals are taken at staggered times to limit contact. Innkeepers quietly discuss recent outbreaks and rumors of new cases. Despite fear, hospitality persists, though modified. Warmth, food, and shelter are offered cautiously. You reflect on how even minor social adjustments reflect larger changes brought by the epidemic, shaping routines, interactions, and expectations of trust and safety in everyday life. In a cluster of villages near Dijon, local authorities impose quarantines on households showing signs of the French disease. Families remain confined, and herbal remedies and prayers are their only companions. Neighbors leave supplies outside doors, and messengers communicate news from nearby towns. Fear and stigma are palpable, yet community support exists. You observe the delicate balance between caution and compassion. Isolation, once rare, becomes a tool to preserve life. Life continues around the quarantined homes. Children play carefully, fields are tended, and the rhythm of daily tasks persists under a shadow, teaching resilience amid disruption. A Benedictine monastery offers sanctuary to travelers and the sick. Monks tend to patients using herbal baths, dietary adjustments, and prayer. Although their remedies offer limited physical relief, the calm presence, routine, and spiritual support ease suffering. You notice how structured environments provide both care and containment, preventing the disease from spreading too rapidly within the community. Observing this, you reflect on the intertwining of faith, knowledge, and practical care, a slow, deliberate approach that mirrors the pace of rural life and contrasts with the bustling uncertainty of Paris or Naples. As winter approaches, the northern countryside grows quiet. Snow begins to dust roofs and fields, slowing travel and reducing contact between villages. You notice a subtle decline in new cases. The cold appears to suppress the spread. Farmers repair fences, chop wood, and preserve food. Life slows, yet persists. You hear discussions suggesting that seasonal changes influence the disease, though the mechanism is unknown. Observing this natural rhythm, you understand that epidemic patterns are not only social but environmental, shaping human behavior and the pace of rural communities in profound, often unnoticed ways. Sitting by a frozen river, you reflect on the journey from Naples to northern France. Cities, towns, and villages have each responded differently to the epidemic. Urban centers adapt with rules, physicians, and quarantines. Rural areas rely on isolation, herbal remedies, and faith. Trade, travel, and human connection carry both sustenance and contagion. You notice a delicate dance between fear, adaptation, and persistence. Life continues, shaped subtly by invisible threats, social customs, and human resilience. In this quiet winter scene, you sense both vulnerability and strength, a meditation on survival, observation, and the slow, steady rhythm of human life under the shadow of the French disease. Traveling south toward Provence, the landscape becomes warmer, with rolling hills, olive groves, and sunlit vineyards. Villages are smaller but bustling with local trade. Merchants speak cautiously of outbreaks, noting that southern ports like Marseille have received travelers from Naples and Genoa. Farmers and townspeople use both folk remedies and prayers to maintain health. Markets are active but quieter, with gestures of caution. Coins wiped with cloth, hands washed in vinegar, and greetings made without touch. The epidemic's reach is clear, yet human life continues steadily, shaped by both fear and routine. At Marseille's busy harbor, you notice ships arriving from Italy, carrying goods and rumors of disease. Sailors and dockworkers whisper about infections aboard vessels, noting sores, fevers, and fatigue among the crew. Authorities inspect incoming ships, demanding clean bills of health. Some vessels are isolated, waiting days or weeks before docking. Merchants debate whether this delay will protect the city or hinder trade. Despite vigilance, disease moves silently, hidden in crowded quarters and unspoken contact. You watch as trade and disease intertwine, each influencing the rhythm and economy of the port city. Moving along the Mediterranean coast, small fishing villages reveal a slower pace of life. Nets are repaired, fish are salted, and children help carry water from wells. Locals speak cautiously about sailors returning from distant ports. Herbal treatments such as rosemary, sage, and fennel are common, often combined with prayers and small rituals to ward off sickness. When cases arise, families isolate the affected members, leaving food outside their doors. You observe the careful balance between isolation and community support, and how even in small villages, knowledge, rumor, and tradition shape responses to disease. Traveling inland, you find quiet villages among lavender fields and rolling hills. Farmers harvest olives, tend goats, and repair stone walls. Conversations about the French disease persist in hushed tones. Women prepare herbal baths, infusions, and poultices for fevers, aches, and sores. Priests lead small services, invoking saints for protection. Villagers modify customs subtly, fewer gatherings at the church, spacing at markets, and caution with visitors. You notice resilience in daily routines, a rhythm adapted to both environment and epidemic, allowing life to continue slowly but steadily despite underlying fear. Joining a caravan heading toward Toulouse, you observe how disease spreads along trade routes. Merchants share goods, news, and rumors, while cautious measures are observed: hand-washing, separating supplies, and avoiding contact with the visibly sick. Inns along the way are quieter than usual, providing meals and rooms with care to prevent contamination. Travelers speak of outbreaks in distant towns, noting how the epidemic follows human movement rather than geography alone. You sense that the epidemic reshapes society at every level. Commerce, travel, and daily life are all guided by the slow, invisible hand of disease. Arriving in Toulouse, you notice a bustling yet cautious city. Streets are crowded, yet citizens keep distance, and market activity is deliberate. Hospitals and hospices accommodate those with French disease, often in separate wards. Physicians rely on mercury treatments, herbal remedies, and careful observation. Priests offer blessings and prayers, and townspeople adapt daily routines, limiting public gatherings, avoiding communal spaces, and maintaining cautious greetings. Even as fear lingers, life continues in measured rhythm, blending routine, ritual, and care to navigate the epidemic. In Toulouse's university, students and professors document cases, symptoms, and progression of the disease. They compare local observations with reports from Marseille, Paris, and Florence. The French disease is classified by stages, patterns of dormancy, and recurrence. Observations are combined with moral, religious, and folk explanations, creating a mosaic of understanding that blends empirical detail with traditional belief. You sense the slow evolution of medical knowledge, a patient accumulation of facts and observations, forming a foundation for future generations even as uncertainty remains. Leaving the city, you traverse nearby villages, where life is slower and more fragile. Families tend fields, care for livestock, and adapt to the epidemic with subtle measures. The French disease spreads in household clusters, but isolation and folk remedies offer some protection. Villagers share knowledge orally, passing observations from one generation to the next. Prayer, ritual, and herbal practice create both physical and psychological reassurance. Life continues with careful attention to both environment and illness, a slow dance of adaptation and vigilance in the quiet countryside. During a festival in honor of a local saint, villagers process through streets carrying candles, relics, and prayers. Even amid fear, ritual offers solidarity. Families leave offerings at the homes of the sick, and community bonds are reinforced. Observing this, you notice how social cohesion and religious practice intertwine with epidemic management. Collective rituals provide psychological comfort, while subtle behaviors reduce risk of transmission. Faith, observation, and tradition coexist, shaping how communities endure and adapt to the persistent presence of disease. As dusk falls over the rolling hills of southern France, you sit atop a small rise, watching smoke rise from chimneys and lanterns twinkle in distant villages. The rhythm of life continues. Families prepare meals, travelers rest at inns, and priests recite evening prayers. The French disease remains present, shaping daily decisions, routines, and social interactions. Yet human resilience persists. People adapt, observe, and support each other quietly, navigating a world subtly but persistently altered by an invisible threat. You feel the slow pulse of life, steady even under shadow, a reminder of endurance and vigilance in uncertain times. Traveling southwest, the Pyrenees rise before you, their snow-dusted peaks silent and imposing. The path is narrow, winding through mountain passes. Merchants and travelers speak cautiously of outbreaks in northern Spain. Villagers leave food and water for travelers, but contact is minimal. The epidemic is present even in these remote regions. You notice how isolation by terrain provides partial protection, yet human movement along trade routes still allows disease to reach new communities. The mountains echo with both beauty and caution, a slow journey into uncertain lands. Crossing into Catalonia, small villages reveal life shaped by adaptation. Shepherds guide flocks along terraced hillsides, farmers harvest olives and grapes, and families prepare for winter. The French disease is whispered about with fear and superstition. Remedies blend herbal medicine, such as sage and rosemary, with prayers to saints. Children learn to avoid the visibly ill, and travelers are welcomed with distance and care. The balance between hospitality and caution is delicate, and the epidemic subtly guides social norms, shaping trust and interactions in these tightly knit communities. Along the Mediterranean coast, ports like Barcelona and Valencia bustle with maritime commerce. Ships carry goods and rumors, along with occasional infection. Authorities inspect crews, sometimes holding ships at anchor for weeks. Merchants debate whether such measures protect or hinder trade. You notice how the epidemic shapes economics. Prices fluctuate, routes change, and distant communities feel the ripple of disease along the coast. Life continues cautiously, each interaction measured against the invisible threat traveling silently across water and land. Inland, towns hold markets with careful observation. Stalls display fruits, vegetables, and textiles. Buyers and sellers maintain distance, often exchanging coins via cloth or placing items on benches to avoid touch. Herbal remedies are displayed alongside goods. Rosemary, fennel, and juniper are recommended for fevers and aches. Conversations speak of infected travelers from Italy or France, or returning soldiers from distant campaigns. Awareness of contagion shapes the rhythm of daily commerce, blending caution with the persistence of economic life, a delicate dance between fear and necessity. Monasteries provide sanctuary and treatment for those afflicted. Monks administer herbal baths, prayers, and simple diets. While physical cures are limited, the spiritual and emotional support offer solace. You observe how monastic care combines observation with devotion, creating a structured approach to illness. The monastery becomes a center of both containment and study. Symptoms are recorded, patients monitored, and knowledge shared quietly among clerics and visiting physicians. Life continues slowly within these walls, shaped by both faith and emerging empirical observation. Traveling through inland villages, you see families self-isolating when a member falls ill. Houses are arranged to allow minimal contact between the sick and healthy. Food and water are left outside doors. Herbs like sage, thyme, and fennel are applied to wounds or steeped for tea. Children learn to navigate the risk. Chores are divided, games adjusted, and proximity limited. The slow, careful rhythm of life persists. You notice how isolation, though rudimentary, reduces spread, and how communities quietly adapt to the epidemic, balancing survival with social cohesion. On the Camino de Santiago, pilgrims continue their journey despite the epidemic. Travelers share stories of outbreaks in cities and villages along the way. Inns and monasteries accommodate them cautiously, often insisting on distance or separate lodging. Pilgrims employ prayers, rituals, and herbal remedies to protect themselves. Conversations blend fear and faith, reflecting both uncertainty and hope. The epidemic follows these routes subtly, spreading with movement yet constrained by season, terrain, and social behaviors. You sense the complex interplay between devotion, travel, and disease in shaping human experience. Arriving in southern Spain, towns along the coast of Andalusia show vibrant life tempered by caution. Fishing boats return with daily catches, and markets bustle with merchants. Yet the epidemic is present. Rumors of sores, fever, and bone pain circulate. Authorities and local healers attempt containment with rudimentary quarantine and herbal treatments. Religious processions offer psychological comfort, while the population adapts routines to minimize exposure. Daily life continues with subtle adjustments, a testament to resilience and the human ability to coexist with persistent, invisible threats. You observe shifts in behavior across Spain. Greetings are less physical, communal baths decline, and public gatherings are smaller. Families isolate members with symptoms, while travelers from affected regions are received cautiously. Herbal remedies, prayers, and folk knowledge dominate care for the poor, while wealthier citizens access physicians and imported treatments. Social interaction, hospitality, and ritual are all subtly reshaped by fear of infection. You reflect on the epidemic's quiet but profound influence, shaping social norms, daily routines, and the very rhythm of life in ways that will persist for generations. As night falls over a coastal Andalusian town, lanterns glimmer along the streets and waves lap against the harbor. Families gather for meals, monks light candles, and travelers rest in inns with careful distance. The French disease lingers quietly in homes, hospitals, and ports. Yet human life adapts, routines continue, rituals provide comfort, and communities endure. You sit by the sea, reflecting on the slow march of the epidemic across Europe, observing resilience, adaptation, and the delicate interplay between fear and daily life. The rhythm of night mirrors the persistence of humanity under shadow. You leave the coastal towns and travel inland through olive groves and rolling hills. Villages here are quieter, and people speak cautiously of travelers from affected ports. Families continue to isolate the sick, while herbal remedies, sage, rosemary, and thyme, are commonly used. Priests lead prayers and blessings in every village, offering reassurance and spiritual guidance. Daily routines persist slowly but carefully, balancing labor, worship, and communal life. You sense how the epidemic shapes both behavior and mindset, leaving subtle but lasting impressions on these communities. Arriving in Granada, markets are bustling but cautious. Merchants handle goods with care, and buyers observe social distance. News of the French disease travels alongside textiles, spices, and fruits. Local physicians offer remedies, blending imported knowledge with traditional herbs. The epidemic influences commerce. Some routes are avoided, prices fluctuate, and certain items are considered protective or medicinal. Observing the careful interplay of trade, medicine, and rumor, you understand how the epidemic molds daily life, quietly steering human behavior across even distant towns. Visiting a monastery outside Granada, you see monks recording cases of French disease. Their notes combine observation, prayer, and herbal remedies. Sick individuals are cared for with compassion and practical caution, isolated in specific wings to reduce contagion. Meals and treatments are carefully administered, and spiritual guidance accompanies physical care. You notice the balance between devotion and empirical observation, an early attempt to document patterns and symptoms, laying foundations for future medical knowledge while providing psychological and practical support for patients. Further inland, rural villages rely on women healers using local herbs and folk remedies. Treatments include poultices for sores, teas for fevers, and aromatic baths. Villagers also perform rituals invoking saints or protective spirits. These methods, though not curative, offer comfort and demonstrate adaptability. Families isolate the sick, leave food outside doors, and maintain cautious contact. You see resilience and ingenuity in daily life, the slow rhythm of survival under the shadow of epidemic disease, blending observation, tradition, and care across generations. As you travel through towns and villages, social customs reflect persistent caution. Handshakes and embraces are less frequent, communal baths are rare, and gatherings are smaller. Merchants, priests, and villagers adjust routines, balancing fear with necessity. Religious processions and festivals continue, providing structure and psychological support. Even as the epidemic persists, daily life finds rhythm. Work, prayer, and community coexist with careful observation and cautious adaptation. The epidemic quietly shapes culture, behavior, and perception of health. Visiting the University of Salamanca, scholars and physicians discuss French disease cases from across Europe. Students record symptoms and progression, debating stages, transmission, and remedies. Though cures remain elusive, observation and documentation grow more systematic. Knowledge spreads through manuscripts, oral reports, and itinerant physicians. The epidemic accelerates intellectual exchange, connecting practical experience with academic inquiry. You witness the slow evolution of scientific thought, blending empirical observation, traditional theory, and moral interpretation in a transitional period of medical history. One quiet evening, you sit atop a hill overlooking terraced fields and distant villages. Smoke rises from chimneys, lanterns flicker in streets, and the Mediterranean glimmers in the fading light. You reflect on the epidemic's reach from Naples to Spain, observing its impact on society, culture, and daily life. Communities adapt, rituals provide solace, and knowledge slowly accumulates. The French disease has shaped human behavior, trade, religion, and medicine. Yet resilience persists, a quiet rhythm of survival and continuity amid uncertainty and fear. Returning to a southern port, you observe ships preparing to sail to North Africa and other Mediterranean lands. Goods, passengers, and stories of illness mingle in careful coordination. Authorities inspect vessels, enforce rudimentary quarantine, and advise travelers. Merchants, sailors, and travelers follow cautious routines, aware of contagion. Life continues along trade routes, with the epidemic subtly guiding movement, commerce, and interaction. You feel the persistent shadow of disease alongside the steady pulse of human activity, each influencing the other in slow, measured rhythm. As night falls in a small inland village, lanterns glow softly, and smoke drifts from hearths. Families gather, food is shared, and prayers are offered for protection. The French disease remains a quiet presence, affecting some households while others remain untouched. Life moves slowly, shaped by caution, observation, and routine. You notice how communities balance fear with normalcy, ritual with practical care, and isolation with support. The epidemic has transformed human behavior subtly yet profoundly, leaving a lasting imprint on social and cultural life. In the stillness of night, you sit beneath an ancient olive tree, listening to the wind and distant sounds of village life. Lanterns flicker, and the stars illuminate a landscape shaped by centuries of human adaptation. The French disease, once terrifying and mysterious, has become part of the slow rhythm of existence. You reflect on resilience, adaptation, and the enduring pursuit of knowledge. Communities persist, rituals comfort, and life continues cautiously but steadily. The epidemic's shadow lingers, yet the human spirit endures, quietly, patiently, resiliently. Winter recedes slowly from London, leaving streets slick with thawing mud and the tang of the Thames. Early spring brings a muted warmth, and with it, movement among the city's inhabitants. You watch merchants arranging stalls along Cheapside, apprentices rushing messages across the stone streets, and barbers' shops filling with the anxious and curious. The French disease, though still present, no longer provokes the same fear it once did. In public houses, conversation shifts cautiously from panic to practical adaptation, hand-washing, separate drinking cups, and modest avoidance of overtly infected neighbors. You note the subtle transformations in daily life, small adjustments to ritual and habit that reflect a society gradually learning coexistence with the epidemic. Even children, who once pressed into crowded streets without concern, now practice a nascent vigilance, their games modified to avoid unnecessary contact. Observation of these patterns reveals the subtle influence of disease on social norms, altering human behavior not through edicts alone but through collective, lived experience. Through Dr. Liker's guidance, you gain access to a small apothecary near Aldgate. The shop smells strongly of dried herbs, tinctures, and wine vinegar. Shelves are lined with small jars labeled in Latin and English: guaiacum, sassafras, China root, and an assortment of local plants with curious names you do not recognize. The apothecary, Master Reynard, demonstrates preparation techniques, simmering roots into decoctions, grinding powders for poultices, and distilling essences. He speaks of remedies with careful skepticism, noting that guaiacum has a gentle effect on pain and inflammation, while mercury's efficacy is often overshadowed by its toxicity. You notice how practical experience outweighs theory here. Trial and error has taught him caution, and he quietly rejects methods that harm patients. Master Reynard's clientele spans social classes, though he notes that the poor rarely afford more than basic herbal mixtures. Observation, he says, is the true physician's guide, an empirical approach slowly taking root, quietly reshaping treatment practices across the city. Venturing into Southwark, you witness the bustling labor of river commerce. Longboats arrive with goods from Kent and beyond, porters unload sacks of grain and wool, and fishmongers shout over the din. Among the laborers, whispers circulate about new cases of the French disease, often traced to travelers returning from France. You meet a boatman, Thomas, who contracted the disease a year prior. His face carries faint scarring and he limps slightly. Thomas describes his treatment with a mixture of mercury and herbal baths, administered at a parish infirmary. Though partially restored to health, he laments the loss of earnings and enduring suspicion from employers. His story highlights the intersection of economic precarity and disease, a theme that threads through every class. Observing the river traffic, you recognize how vital mobility and trade are to both prosperity and contagion, a constant tension shaping urban life in London. At St. Thomas's Hospital, you witness the slow rhythms of charitable care. The infirmary houses men and women in varying stages of illness. A young woman, Alice, lies on a narrow bed, fevered and weak, tended by a sister who whispers prayers while changing linen. Alice's husband, a merchant returning from Normandy, brought her the infection unknowingly. She recounts her symptoms quietly: sores on the limbs, fevers that wake her night after night. You note the dedication of the hospital attendants, blending spiritual consolation with practical care. The hospital's approach mirrors that of French institutions but adapts to England's patchwork governance. Care is distributed through charity and parish oversight rather than centralized public health mandates. You reflect on the resilience of patients and caregivers alike, the quiet heroism of daily labor amidst suffering, and the ways communities shape recovery through attention, support, and modest interventions. Returning to the Tabard Inn in the evening, you note how nightly gatherings serve as informal forums for discussion. Travelers, merchants, and local literates exchange news of disease, treatments, and social change. One evening, an English merchant recounts a recent debate in Guildhall about the regulation of barbers and physicians. Guild masters argue for stricter oversight, fearing both malpractice and the spread of infection. Physicians, in contrast, advocate for standardization of knowledge, emphasizing observation and case records. The tension between professional authority and civic governance strikes you as distinct from Venice or Paris. England's approach is pragmatic, often improvised, shaped by local interests and limited enforcement, yet responsive in subtle ways. Listening, you reflect on how societies negotiate the balance between expertise and custom, formal knowledge and lived experience, a theme resonant across every region you have observed. Spring deepens across London, and markets swell with fresh produce from surrounding counties. You notice the heightened attention to hygiene among vendors. Baskets lined with clean cloths, water kept near stalls for washing hands and knives. Inhabitants have begun avoiding crowded indoor markets during peak hours, a subtle adaptation to the persistent threat of the French disease. At a fruit stall, you speak with a widow named Eleanor who lost her husband to the illness 2 years prior. She now works tirelessly to provide for her children. She tells you, "We live carefully, but we cannot hide from what comes." Her eyes betray both weariness and determination. Observing her, you recognize that beyond medical interventions, survival hinges on vigilance, communal awareness, and the quiet courage of daily life. You visit a small parish in Clerkenwell where the local vicar has organized a modest hospice for the afflicted poor. Within the chapel, beds are arranged in neat rows, each patient provided with basic care: clean bedding, herbal poultices, and meals prepared by volunteers. The vicar emphasizes spiritual support, yet practical measures are evident: washed linens, separate drinking vessels, and weekly inspections of hygiene. A woman named Margaret, previously dismissed from her household due to facial lesions, recounts her experience. "Without this place, I would be begging in the streets," she whispers. The hospice embodies the intersection of charity, faith, and early public health awareness, a testament to the ways communities attempt to mitigate the epidemic in the absence of formal institutions. Dr. Leiker invites you to observe consultations in his private chambers. He meticulously records each case, noting symptoms, treatments, and outcomes. One patient, a young merchant named Richard, complains of sores, fever, and joint pain. Dr. Leiker alternates mercury applications with herbal baths, emphasizing moderation and careful observation. Richard's mother, present during the consultation, expresses skepticism. Stronger medicine must cure stronger sickness. she insists. Dr. Leiker patiently explains the risks, demonstrating the tension between empirical knowledge and popular expectation. You note how slowly rational medical discourse penetrates entrenched beliefs, a challenge faced across all European cities you have visited. Walking along the Thames, you observe how the river itself becomes a vector of both trade and disease. Boats crowded with passengers, goods, and livestock move from port to port, carrying both prosperity and contagion. Dockworkers share tales of colleagues falling ill after returning from France or the Low Countries. A boatman named John shows you a ledger where he tracks illness among his crew, a rudimentary epidemiological record. These informal records, born of necessity, hint at an emergent understanding of contagion, an embryonic public health consciousness that relies on observation, documentation, and experience rather than theory alone. You attend a meeting of the Company of Barber Surgeons, where apprentices demonstrate skills in bloodletting, lancing sores, and preparing ointments. Master Surgeon William explains, "Our hands know more than our books." Apprentices watch carefully as he applies a topical mercury preparation to a patient's ulcer, explaining both the potential benefits and risks. The practical, hands-on instruction contrasts with the theoretical approach of physicians, yet both coexist in London's medical landscape. You reflect on how differing knowledge systems, empirical apprenticeship and academic study, converge to shape responses to the French disease. A day spent among midwives reveals another facet of epidemic management. Women attending births notice telltale sores among mothers and infants. Some midwives, wary of mercury's toxicity, employ herbal baths and poultices, while others adhere to physician recommendations. One midwife, Joan, tells you of a mother whose child survived despite the disease, crediting both careful hygiene and herbal remedies. These small, domestic interventions highlight the role of women in disease prevention and care, often operating at the intersection of knowledge, tradition, and necessity. Visiting a wealthy merchant household, you observe contrasts in care. The family receives private physician visits, mercury treatments in enclosed cabinets, and a diet tailored to maintain strength and reduce symptoms. Servants carefully monitor contact between patients and household members, isolating the afflicted in a well-ventilated chamber. Despite these measures, gossip circulates, and the stigma of illness is palpable. The wealthy may access the finest treatments, yet the psychological and social impacts of the epidemic extend even into these well-protected homes. In contrast, a modest artisan family offers a different perspective. The father, afflicted for months, receives care from a barber surgeon, while neighbors help with labor and household chores. Herbal baths and poultices provide partial relief, though the illness lingers. You note the community's resilience and reliance on shared knowledge, remedies adapted through trial and error, vigilance in daily routines, and mutual support. Social cohesion becomes as vital as any medicinal intervention, emphasizing the communal nature of survival amidst persistent danger. A visit to a London apothecary highlights the circulation of medical knowledge. Printed leaflets with advice on the French disease are sold to the literate public, blending accurate observation with superstition. Remedies vary widely, from herbal decoctions to mercury, reflecting the uneven diffusion of information. You observe how commercial incentives shape dissemination. Well-marketed treatments often overshadow more effective but less dramatic methods. Knowledge is no longer solely in physicians' hands. It circulates among merchants, barbers, and literate laypeople, creating a complex ecosystem of information, expectation, and practice. At the Guildhall, city officials debate measures to control the spread. Restrictions on public gatherings, inspection of bathhouses, and licensing of barbers are discussed. Some councillors resist interference in private households, fearing economic disruption. The debates reveal the tension between public health imperatives and civic autonomy, illustrating the challenges of governing a densely populated city in crisis. You note parallels with Venice's systematic approach and France's parish-based interventions. London relies on negotiation, compromise, and civic pragmatism rather than centralized authority. You encounter a young apprentice, Henry, who has lost both parents to the French disease. He now works in a print shop, learning the trade while contributing to household income. Henry's knowledge of remedies comes from leaflets and conversations with neighbors. His situation exemplifies how social and economic vulnerability intersects with disease, shaping access to care, survival strategies, and education. You are struck by the adaptability of children and youths who navigate both the labor market and epidemic threats simultaneously, learning through observation, necessity, and community guidance. A brief excursion to a riverside village outside London allows comparison with urban responses. Here, communal support is paramount. Neighbors tend fields for the sick, share herbs, and administer basic remedies. Mercury is scarce, so herbal treatments dominate. Villagers develop nuanced understandings of symptoms, contagion, and timing of interventions through collective experience. You observe that while the disease is less lethal in rural areas due to smaller population density, social cohesion compensates for the lack of formal medical infrastructure, illustrating a different model of resilience. Returning to St. Bartholomew's, you witness a patient, Samuel, recovering slowly under the care of attendants and herbal treatments. His family visits daily, assisting with feeding and cleaning. Mercury is applied sparingly, alternating with baths and poultices. Dr. Leiker notes improvements in outcomes when multiple methods are combined with attentive care. You recognize an emergent empirical logic. Observation, trial, and documentation produce knowledge that adapts to circumstances, reflecting a subtle but profound shift in medical reasoning. In the evening at the Tabard Inn, discussion turns to moral and spiritual reflections on the epidemic. Travelers, clergy, and professionals debate whether the French disease is divine punishment, a natural consequence of travel and trade, or a test of communal solidarity. Some argue for strict adherence to pious behavior, others for practical interventions. The dialogue reveals how medical, moral, and social discourses intertwine, shaping behavior and perception. The epidemic functions as both a biological and cultural force, prompting reflection, adaptation, and negotiation across domains of life. You take note of the seasonal rhythm returning to London streets. Spring markets bustle, apprentices resume outdoor work, and river traffic swells. Yet, the shadow of the French disease remains, informing routines and social interaction. Greetings are cautious, public cups avoided, and households maintain clean water and bedding. You reflect on the adaptability of Londoners, navigating commerce, care, and daily life under persistent threat. The epidemic, while disruptive, catalyzes observation, experimentation, and innovation, laying the groundwork for a more empirical, evidence-informed approach to medicine and public health in the years to come. Summer arrives in London, and the city swells with visitors from surrounding counties. You notice heightened awareness of contagion in taverns and inns, cups no longer shared, floors swept more frequently, and chamber pots emptied promptly. A brewer named Thomas describes how his apprentices now handle ingredients and fermenting vessels with care to avoid spreading disease. Even small actions, he insists, can prevent further outbreaks. The epidemic has instilled a culture of caution that permeates daily life, extending beyond medicine into commerce, hospitality, and domestic routines. You attend a parish feast celebrating the feast of St. Bartholomew, observing both joy and precaution. Tables are spaced, communal drinking vessels replaced with individual cups, and hand-washing emphasized before meals. A priest delivers a sermon reflecting on compassion for the sick, stressing moral duty alongside practical hygiene. You see families greeting each other tentatively, a physical manifestation of lingering fear. The feast illustrates how religious and social rituals adapt under the shadow of epidemic, maintaining continuity while embedding new precautions. At the Guild of Clothiers, you witness discussions of worker absenteeism due to illness. Guild masters report that affected apprentices and journeymen must be isolated, slowing production. Yet, some masters encourage herbal remedies and care at home, showing an early recognition of workplace health's economic impact. You note how trade, labor, and public health intersect. Illness is not solely a personal misfortune but an economic and social variable shaping urban governance and commerce. Exploring rural Middlesex, you observe a small village response to returning laborers from France. Families enforce quarantine-like measures, separating those with symptoms. Women prepare herbal baths and broths, men tend fields for the sick. Knowledge of contagion spreads informally, passed through observation and experience. A farmer named Robert explains, "We watch who gets ill and who doesn't. Then we know what works." This practical epidemiology, emergent rather than formalized, underscores how communities adapt intuitively in the absence of centralized guidance. A visit to the Tower of London reveals how the monarchy monitors epidemic risk. Guards and clerks describe measures to screen arriving foreigners, isolate suspected cases, and maintain records. The Crown balances commerce with caution, imposing restrictions without halting trade entirely. Observing these measures highlights how central authorities begin to appreciate the economic as well as human costs of epidemics, and how governance evolves in response to repeated outbreaks. In a wealthy merchant's household, you witness a private physician's careful regimen. Mercury treatments alternate with herbal decoctions and dietary adjustments. The family keeps meticulous records of symptoms, treatment, and recovery. This systematic approach, though accessible only to the affluent, exemplifies early forms of clinical observation that will influence future medical methods. The contrast with rural practices underscores inequality, yet also shows how empirical learning occurs at all social levels, albeit differently. You observe London printers producing new medical texts that blend observation, theory, and popular remedies. Leaflets warn of contagion while promoting herbal remedies, hygiene, and moderation in treatment. Physicians and apothecaries increasingly consult these texts, creating a feedback loop of knowledge circulation. Literacy, trade networks, and social aspiration converge to spread empirical understanding beyond elite physicians, gradually democratizing medical knowledge. A summer evening brings you to a river ferry crowded with passengers, including laborers, merchants, and clergy. Conversations reveal varied understanding of the disease. Some recount herbal remedies, others insist on strict mercury treatment. You realize that London's epidemic has produced a mosaic of knowledge, formal, empirical, traditional, and popular, each influencing behavior, expectations, and outcomes. Disease thus acts as both teacher and catalyst, shaping social cognition alongside mortality. At St. Thomas's Hospital, you witness a ward managing both French pox and unrelated illness. Care includes attention to hygiene, nutrition, and herbal treatment, though mercury remains standard when tolerated. Patient stories reveal lingering social and economic consequences. Sailors rendered unemployable, widows relying on charity, and artisans unable to work. These narratives illustrate how the epidemic intersects with pre-existing vulnerabilities, creating cascading effects that extend far beyond immediate illness. You attend a meeting of physicians in the city's central hall, where debate centers on treatment protocols. Some advocate strict mercury usage, others favor alternating therapies with herbs, baths, and diet. Observations of outcomes guide discussion more than ancient texts. You note the nascent empirical methodology, careful documentation, peer exchange, and iterative experimentation, laying the groundwork for more systematic medical reasoning in England. In the parish of St. Giles, you observe charitable care for the poor. Volunteers assist the sick, provide clean linens, and distribute simple herbal remedies. The communal spirit and practical knowledge sustain life where formal medicine cannot reach. You see parallels with Normandy villages, highlighting common adaptive strategies across urban and rural environments, emphasizing human resilience in the face of limited resources. You encounter a young woman, Alice, recently widowed after her husband contracted the disease while serving abroad. Her social network provides temporary support, yet she struggles with stigma, economic insecurity, and fear of infection. Alice's story exemplifies how gender, social status, and marital ties influence vulnerability. You observe that epidemic impact is uneven, with marginalized individuals bearing disproportionate suffering despite equal biological risk. Visiting a London apothecary, you witness preparation of complex herbal compounds, some combined with small doses of mercury. The pharmacist explains how practical observation informs proportion, timing, and combination. You see early empirical experimentation, trial, error, and adaptation shaping treatment choices. The blending of herbal knowledge with cautious chemical intervention reflects the evolving Renaissance approach to medicine: flexible, observant, and pragmatic. Returning to St. Bartholomew's, you note how nurses and attendants develop routines for disease management. Beds are spaced, linens replaced, and patient hygiene prioritized. Practices evolve through trial and observation, sometimes deviating from official protocols. You realize that ordinary caregivers, often overlooked in historical accounts, contribute substantially to medical knowledge through careful, sustained attention, underscoring the collective nature of epidemic response. In a quiet evening reflection at the Tabard Inn, you consolidate observations from months in London. Epidemic impacts extend across social strata: nobility shielded with private care, artisans and laborers navigating communal support, the poor relying on charity. Knowledge circulates unevenly but adapts constantly through experience, observation, and documentation. Social, economic, and moral dimensions intertwine, producing a complex, emergent understanding of disease. London stands as a city of adaptation, resilience, and gradual empiricism, its residents negotiating fear and survival with ingenuity. Autumn arrives and London's streets bustle with merchants preparing for winter trade. You notice that vigilance against the French Pox persists. Water in public baths is changed frequently, street sweepers remove waste promptly, and merchants disinfect goods arriving from abroad. At a candlemaker's shop, apprentices recount how even smallpox and the French disease have shaped routines: candles burned at dawn to purify air, herbs hung over doorways. Epidemic consciousness now informs daily life, blending superstition, observation, and practical precaution into a new urban hygiene culture. You visit an artisan guild hall where apprentices demonstrate textile work. Guild masters insist on separating those showing symptoms and enforcing personal cleanliness. The masters also require written case notes for anyone ill, fostering a rudimentary record-keeping practice. Discussions reveal how labor productivity and disease are interlinked. Illness among apprentices threatens both economic stability and skill transmission. Observing these measures highlights early recognition of occupational health and its consequences for urban economies. At a parish school, teachers explain how children are instructed to avoid close contact, wash hands, and remain away from sick neighbors. Even the young absorb knowledge of contagion through observation and practice. A teacher explains, better they learn caution now than suffer later. Education, you realize, becomes another vector for epidemic management, not through formal medicine but through habits, discipline, and communal norms that protect vulnerable populations. Visiting the Thames riverbanks, you see fishermen and watermen carefully maintaining clean boats and nets. They avoid crowded docking areas, recognizing the link between proximity and infection. Conversations reveal oral traditions: herbs used for washing, salt applied to wounds, and boiling water for drinking. Folk knowledge merges with emerging scientific observation, producing a layered understanding of prevention that cuts across social strata and occupational boundaries. In a wealthy London home, you observe a physician's carefully documented casebook. Entries detail symptoms, treatments, diet, and herbal adjuncts. You note the inclusion of social and environmental observations, crowded living quarters, exposure to travelers, and household hygiene. This represents a shift from purely humoral theory toward practical empiricism. Observing these records highlights how meticulous observation can yield insights even without complete theoretical understanding, foreshadowing modern epidemiology. At St. Thomas's, you encounter a young apprentice nurse named Elizabeth. She explains how caregivers improvise treatments when mercury fails: poultices, herbal baths, and careful feeding. Elizabeth's skill emerges from experience and observation, not formal study. Her role exemplifies how knowledge flows from practice rather than books, illustrating the vital contribution of non-elite participants to the collective understanding of disease and care in epidemic conditions. You attend a gathering of physicians at a private residence. Debate centers on alternating treatments with mercury and herbal remedies. One doctor insists, observe carefully, not all reactions are beneficial. Another counters, emphasizing patient belief and compliance. You recognize the tension between empirical observation and patient expectation. Success often depends as much on trust and social negotiation as on the biochemical efficacy of the treatment itself, revealing medicine as both science and social practice. Walking through London's markets, you notice signs of adaptation. Vendors sell individual cups and bowls, food is wrapped to prevent contact, and herbal remedies are prominently displayed. People actively discuss treatments, comparing home remedies with physicians' advice. Public knowledge circulates informally alongside professional guidance. Observation of these interactions reveals a culture negotiating risk, commerce, and survival simultaneously, blending practical wisdom with emerging empirical medical thought. A local printer invites you to assist with a new pamphlet summarizing successful treatments. Leaflets combine woodcut illustrations, symptom descriptions, and suggested remedies, both herbal and chemical. Printers remark that literacy is rising and there is a market among apprentices, merchants, and literate servants eager to protect themselves or care for relatives. Epidemic knowledge spreads faster than ever, no longer confined to physicians, heralding a subtle democratization of medical understanding. You observe a parish funeral for a French pox victim. Attendance is modest, as fear of contagion keeps some away. Relatives perform rites cautiously, gloves, distance, and ritual washing of hands. Despite adaptations, grief and social disruption persist. The epidemic alters not only medical practice but social rituals, reshaping mourning, family networks, and communal memory. Disease is as much a social force as a biological one, changing how communities interact with life, death, and care. Visiting a rural market on the city's outskirts, you witness farmers trading herbs, poultices, and practical advice. Knowledge circulates bidirectionally. Urban physicians learn of effective rural treatments, while villagers adopt some formal remedies, especially refined mercury ointments. Epidemic management emerges as a hybrid system, formal and folk practices converging through trade and observation, demonstrating the porous boundaries of medical knowledge and its adaptive evolution in response to lived experience. You accompany a London merchant family traveling to Canterbury. Along the way, precautions continue: separate lodging for any sick attendants, herbs hung in doorways, and avoidance of crowded inns. Travelers' observations and diaries circulate back to urban centers, reinforcing awareness and spreading practical knowledge. Mobility of people accelerates both risk and learning, illustrating how epidemic experience shapes not only stationary communities but networks of commerce and communication. At Canterbury, you study hospital practices for pilgrims. Space is limited, so wards must accommodate both sick travelers and locals. Mercury and herbal treatments coexist, while caregivers employ basic hygiene and isolation measures. Pilgrims' movement across regions inadvertently spreads knowledge of symptoms, remedies, and cautionary measures. The interaction of travel, trade, and treatment highlights the epidemic as a vector of cultural as well as biological transmission. Returning to London, you note winter preparations: firewood stockpiled, water sources purified, and families consolidating members to minimize exposure. Urban planning begins to reflect epidemiological awareness. Streets widened for airflow, sanitation emphasized, and hospitals adapted for isolation. The epidemic's shadow drives structural changes that outlast immediate outbreaks, shaping urban life and governance for decades to come. On a reflective evening at the Tabard Inn, you compile observations from months in England. Epidemic impacts ripple across social, economic, and cultural domains. Hospitals adapt, households modify behavior, physicians experiment, and folk remedies persist. Knowledge circulates through print, trade, and oral transmission, creating a complex, emergent understanding. The French Pox transforms not only bodies but society itself, reshaping medical thought, social norms, and urban infrastructure. The resilient response, a mosaic of adaptation and empiricism, leaves England prepared for future epidemics in ways both visible and subtle. Spring returns to London, and with it, a renewed sense of energy and vigilance. Streets bustle with merchants, apprentices, and families emerging from winter isolation. Physicians note early signs of new infections and compare observations with last year's records. They refine treatment schedules, alternating mercury applications with herbal decoctions. Observing patients over multiple seasons allows more precise assessment of efficacy. The city's medical community is learning to track outcomes systematically, a precursor to modern clinical observation. You attend a meeting of St. Bartholomew's administrators. Discussions focus on bed allocation, managing infectious and non-infectious patients, and planning for potential influxes during summer. The epidemic has highlighted deficiencies in hospital design, poor ventilation, overcrowding, and inadequate sanitation. Proposals include separating wards more clearly, increasing outdoor air exposure, and improving waste disposal. The institution is evolving into a more responsive and adaptive organization, balancing charity with practical public health measures. In a merchant household, you witness practical preventive measures. Family members are segregated if illness appears, bedding washed, and herbs burned indoors to purify the air. Visitors are scrutinized, and minor symptoms prompt immediate isolation. These routines, simple yet effective, reduce household transmission. You note the subtle integration of observation, superstition, and early empirical knowledge. Families act as microepidemiologists, learning and adapting through experience, a decentralized but vital component of public health. At a rural manor outside London, you see differences in response. Peasants rely on herbal remedies and local healers, occasionally supplemented by visiting physicians. Social hierarchy affects access. Landowners receive refined mercury treatments, while laborers depend on folk knowledge and communal support. Despite inequalities, information trickles down. Treatments with observed success become widely known. This illustrates how experiential knowledge diffuses across class lines, bridging formal and informal medical practices. You accompany a physician on house visits in London's poorer parishes. Conditions are cramped. Families often share a single room. Mercury treatments are administered sparingly, and herbal baths used when patients cannot tolerate stronger interventions. Observing how caregivers balance risk and comfort reinforces the importance of context. Treatment efficacy is inseparable from social and environmental conditions. These visits reveal the multidimensional nature of care, blending medicine, empathy, and practical compromise. A street printer shows you pamphlets in development, including a series on the French Pox aimed at literate apprentices and merchants. Woodcut illustrations depict early symptoms, hygiene practices, and safe remedies. The texts merge scientific observation, folk knowledge, and moral lessons. Public demand for such guides underscores the appetite for accessible medical knowledge. The circulation of these pamphlets contributes to an early form of public health education, bridging gaps between physicians and lay people. Visiting the Thames docks, you notice dockworkers taking precautions against imported disease. Ships are fumigated, goods aired, and sailors with suspicious sores quarantined. Merchants implement contracts specifying inspection protocols. The epidemic has reshaped trade routines. Logistics, sanitation, and risk management are inseparable. Economic survival depends on balancing commerce and health. Observing these adaptations highlights the intertwining of disease management with urban economy and governance. At a guild hall for weavers, masters document apprentices' health. Notes on absences, symptoms, and recovery inform future hiring and training. This proto-occupational health system demonstrates early awareness that disease affects both productivity and skill continuity. Artisans' records become a form of collective intelligence, storing experiential knowledge to guide decisions. Observation, rather than theory alone, drives these practical innovations. You witness a local festival modified to reduce contagion. Communal feasts replaced by small household gatherings, dancers spaced farther apart, and hand-washing promoted before shared meals. Traditions adapt pragmatically to epidemic realities. Culture proves flexible. Community identity survives while reducing risk. These changes illustrate how social customs and health awareness co-evolve, shaping behaviors over generations. In consultation with Dr. Laker, you discuss longitudinal observations of patients treated with combined mercury and herbal regimens. Statistical patterns emerge. Moderate mercury applications with herbal adjuncts improve survival and reduce complications. Physicians are beginning to quantify outcomes systematically, creating the earliest frameworks for evidence-based practice. Patient compliance remains challenging, highlighting the interplay of belief, expectation, and treatment efficacy in shaping medical outcomes. At St. Thomas's, you observe training of new attendants. They learn hygiene, herbal preparation, and compassionate care. Emphasis is placed on careful observation, noting fever, lesions, diet, and response to interventions. These apprentices represent the next generation of caregivers, learning through practice rather than formal texts alone. The hospital functions as a living classroom, demonstrating the transmission of empirical knowledge across generations. You attend a lecture by a visiting physician from Padua, presenting comparative data from Italy and England. Cases show similar patterns: lesions, fever, and bone pain, with varying treatment outcomes. He emphasizes careful recording of observations, noting failures as much as successes. Knowledge is increasingly collaborative, circulating between countries, illustrating the transnational dimensions of epidemic response in early Renaissance Europe. In rural villages, communal support remains essential. Farmers with limited access to physicians rely on mutual aid networks. You observe a family tending a sick neighbor, providing meals, herbal remedies, and physical assistance. Social cohesion emerges as a crucial factor in survival. Epidemics highlight both vulnerabilities and the adaptive strategies communities develop, blending altruism and practical necessity. A group of street vendors debates the efficacy of new remedies. Some favor imported guacamole, others rely on local herbs. The discussion is heated, informed by observation and experience rather than formal training. You note how popular medical knowledge spreads orally, tested in everyday life. This informal exchange complements formal treatments and illustrates the multiple pathways through which medical understanding evolves. At a London tavern, you overhear stories of recovered patients. Their narratives combine practical advice, moral reflection, and superstition. These tales circulate among urban populations, shaping perceptions of risk, effectiveness of treatments, and social behavior. Oral histories become instruments of collective memory, reinforcing both fear and practical adaptation in epidemic management. In a wealthy household, you witness elaborate mercury treatments and carefully prepared herbal baths. Despite sophistication, patient outcomes are mixed. Physicians carefully document both failures and successes, debating refinements. Wealth provides access, but not immunity. The epidemic demonstrates the limits of resources alone in overcoming disease, emphasizing the importance of observation, adaptation, and empirical learning. You explore London's book market, where texts on the French Pox circulate widely. Some are technical, aimed at physicians. Others are practical, accessible to literate merchants and apprentices. Illustrated pamphlets blend empirical observation, folk remedies, and moral guidance. Knowledge now flows beyond formal institutions, empowering the public to participate in understanding and managing disease. Visiting a parish church, you observe rituals adapted for epidemic conditions. Prayer and moral guidance remain central, but physical precautions are integrated: spacing, avoidance of shared vessels, and ventilation. Religious observance coexists with empirical practice, reflecting the intertwined cultural and practical responses to disease. Faith and reason combine to sustain communities during crisis. In a rural fair, you see how epidemic awareness shapes commerce. Food is sold in sealed packages, herbs are prominently marketed, and medical advice is exchanged among vendors. Economic activity adapts without halting. Disease reshapes markets as much as households, demonstrating the pervasive influence of epidemics on social, economic, and cultural life. Reflecting on your 2 years in Europe, you note profound transformations. Medical practice evolves from theory to empirical observation. Communities adapt social customs, hygiene, and commerce. Knowledge circulates across social and geographic boundaries. Disease, though destructive, catalyzes innovation, resilience, and the development of collective intelligence. The French pox leaves Europe permanently altered, its lessons etched into both medical science and social consciousness, preparing the continent for future challenges. You arrive in Lisbon, noting how the city's seafaring nature shapes both commerce and disease. Sailors returning from Africa, India, and the Americas bring exotic goods and new illnesses. Merchants adapt, separating sick crew from healthy, airing cargo, and disinfecting quarters with herbs and smoke. Public health measures are informal but informed by experience, combining practicality and superstition. Portuguese physicians, like Dr. Rodrigues, integrate remedies from 4 continents, giving Lisbon unique advantages in treating the French disease. Meeting Dr. Joan Rodrigues, you see a vast collection of imported substances. Guacacum wood from Brazil, African herbs, Indian spices, all lined in labeled jars. Treatments combine European tradition with global imports, emphasizing observation over strict adherence to theory. Patients of all classes receive care, though wealth and social status still influence access. You witness a young merchant treated with guacacum and willow bark, showing reduced lesions and improved mobility, a practical success without full understanding of mechanisms. In Lisbon's All Saints Royal Hospital, you observe wards dedicated to the French disease. Nurses and monks provide basic care, clean bedding, herbal baths, dietary regulation. Mercury is reserved for wealthier patients, reflecting both scarcity and toxicity. Unlike London, parish-based oversight is weaker, replaced by royal authority and hospital administration. Social hierarchies manifest clearly. Enslaved Africans receive only minimal care, while affluent citizens access imported treatments. Observation and adaptation remain central to patient management. You travel overland to Seville, witnessing the southern Iberian landscape, golden hills, olive groves, fortified towns. Caravan life illustrates how commerce and disease intertwine. Traders, diplomats, and scholars debate disease origin, linking outbreaks to Columbus voyages while acknowledging pre-existing cases in Europe. Empirical observations fuel discussion. Some attribute the epidemic to the Americas, others propose independent European mutations. Knowledge is no longer local, it circulates across networks of trade and scholarship. Arriving in Seville, you encounter a bustling port at the heart of Spain's American empire. Shipyards construct vessels for Atlantic voyages. Warehouses overflow with treasures from the New World. Crowds of sailors, merchants, and officials create dense urban conditions where disease spreads easily. Observing daily life, you note the integration of epidemic awareness, hand-washing, isolation of the sick, and selective access to crowded spaces. Social behaviors adapt pragmatically to prevent transmission. Through Dr. Francisco López de Villalobos, you access Spanish royal medical networks. He emphasizes careful observation, symptoms, progression, remission, and recurrence. Detailed case histories distinguish the French disease from other maladies. Patients undergo moderate mercury treatments supplemented with guacacum and dietary regimens. Documentation of outcomes is rigorous, forming a nascent epidemiological record. You see the beginnings of systematic, evidence-based medicine in Spain's response. You examine logs at the Casa de Contratación, the administrative hub for Spain's overseas empire. Crew health reports from Columbus expeditions reveal early infections, ambiguous in origin but detailed enough to trace disease progression. Letters from sailors describe fevers, lesions, and bone pain. Whether contracted in the Americas or after return to Spanish ports remains debated, but careful records allow reconstruction of transmission patterns. Knowledge begins to transcend individual experience, forming collective understanding. Meeting Rodrigo Diarez, a veteran of Columbus' first voyage, you hear first-hand accounts. Some sailors fell ill shortly after returning. Treatments were primitive, relying on herbal infusions from Caribbean flora. Guacacum eventually became the preferred remedy, imported back to Europe. Indigenous knowledge, adapted by European sailors, illustrates how practical observation across cultures enriches treatment options. Local remedies gradually integrate into official protocols, reflecting empirical pragmatism. In Salamanca, you observe university scholars studying the French disease, comparing Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian records. Curriculum integrates humanist learning with practical observation, emphasizing longitudinal study and case documentation. Students debate theoretical origins and evaluate treatment efficacy. Knowledge exchange across universities and cities contributes to a more interconnected European medical community, laying the groundwork for future scientific collaboration. You tour hospitals in Barcelona, established to treat returning sailors and local citizens. Infrastructure is adapted from previous plague experiences: separated wards, hygienic practices, dietary regulation, and herbal remedies. Mercury is reserved for high-status patients. Observation and incremental learning dominate treatment decisions. Social hierarchies influence who receives care and which remedies are applied, reflecting broader patterns seen across Europe. Traveling through Spanish towns, you observe rural coping mechanisms. Families rely on local healers, herbal remedies, and communal support. Children assist sick parents. Neighbors help maintain fields. Epidemics reinforce social cohesion in the countryside, blending practical adaptation with faith-based resilience. Religious observance continues, often integrated with preventive measures. Saints associated with skin diseases, such as Saint Fiacre and Saint Roque, receive increased veneration, reflecting the cultural adaptation to prolonged epidemic conditions. You witness urban social adaptation, markets modified for hygiene, street vendors promoting safe remedies, guilds monitoring apprentices' health. Merchants implement quarantine measures for ships and warehouses. Public awareness of contagion grows. Practices balance economic necessity with disease prevention, illustrating pragmatic social learning. Communication between physicians, guilds, and officials facilitates incremental improvements in both individual and community health. In Seville, you observe the elite receiving imported remedies from Portugal and the Americas. Guacacum, sarsapilla, and Indian herbs are administered alongside moderate mercury treatments. Wealth ensures early access and experimental care, but outcomes remain variable. Observation, rather than adherence to theory alone, guides treatment modifications. The epidemic encourages empirical adaptation even among the privileged, challenging classical medical dogma. You note the broader social consequences. Epidemics exacerbate inequality. The wealthy maintain livelihoods and status, while the poor suffer economic loss, stigma, and limited care. Women are particularly vulnerable. Infection can destroy marital prospects and social standing. Institutions like hospitals and guilds mitigate but do not eliminate disparities. Social hierarchies influence both exposure and access, revealing the persistent intersection of disease with power and privilege. Religious institutions maintain a dual role: spiritual guidance and practical intervention. Prayers, processions, and masses coexist with hygiene advice and support for hospitals. Clergy like Father Thomas in England integrate faith with empirical recommendations. Communities blend moral, spiritual, and practical responses, demonstrating adaptive cultural resilience to epidemic disease. You compile observations across Europe: Venice, Paris, London, Lisbon, Seville. Patterns emerge. Initial fear and scapegoating give way to practical adaptations. Knowledge spreads through texts, correspondence, and apprenticeship. Institutions evolve incrementally. Social customs change to reduce contagion. Epidemics catalyze empirical observation, prompting reassessment of inherited medical authorities. Human resilience is evident across diverse settings. In conversation with physicians in Seville, you note early epidemiological thinking. Mapping outbreaks, recording symptoms, and evaluating treatments allows comparative analysis. These records create cumulative knowledge over time, forming a basis for future public health science. Physicians emphasize patience and careful observation over dogma, signaling a shift toward evidence-based approaches. You observe cultural integration of epidemic awareness: frescoes of healing saints, printed pamphlets, street instruction, guild training. Knowledge dissemination now combines oral, visual, and written forms. Public engagement in disease management complements institutional care. Communities are active participants, not passive sufferers. Returning to coastal ports, you witness maritime controls. quarantines for arriving ships, isolation of sick sailors, fumigation of cargo. Trade continues but adapts to epidemic risk. Portugal and Spain demonstrate how economic imperatives coexist with emerging public health measures. Observation and adaptation become core strategies for both commerce and medicine. As winter approaches, you reflect on the French disease across Europe. It is endemic, not vanishing. Responses have matured: empirical treatment, social adaptation, institutional support, and cultural integration. Epidemic experiences accelerate scientific observation, transform social behavior, and influence art, religion, and commerce. The disease crosses boundaries but provokes adaptation at every level of society. Human vulnerability and ingenuity coexist, shaping the Renaissance world. You board a ship for your return home, carrying notes, observations, and a broader understanding of epidemics' societal impact. Reflection reveals common patterns: initial fear, social scapegoating, gradual adaptation, knowledge accumulation. Europe is changed medically, socially, and culturally by the French disease. Its lessons inform future responses to new outbreaks. As your ship departs the Iberian coast, the Atlantic stretches endlessly ahead. You reflect on how the French disease has altered European life, trade routes, family structures, religious practices, and medicine itself. Each port, city, and village revealed a patchwork of adaptation: empirical observation guiding treatment, communal support in rural areas, guild assistance in towns, and sophisticated imported remedies for the wealthy. The epidemic functions as both a disruptor and teacher, showing humanity's limits and its inventive capacities. You consider the broader implications. Knowledge gained here could inform responses to future epidemics, shaping Europe's intellectual and medical trajectory for generations. Shipboard life is constrained, yet offers new insight. Sailors follow strict hygiene routines. Fresh water is rationed, cooking implements cleaned, bedding aired, and the sick isolated. You observe how routine vigilance reduces the spread of infections among a confined crew. Conversations with mariners reveal their practical understanding. Many attribute survival less to formal remedies than to careful observation and prompt isolation. They share tales of colleagues lost to the French disease in Lisbon, London, and Seville, recounting both tragedy and lessons learned. These oral narratives supplement formal medical knowledge, creating a dynamic, distributed system of epidemic intelligence. The sea swells and rolls, and your thoughts return to the families you observed across Europe. In France, communal support allowed subsistence. In England, parish charity protected the poor. In Iberia, hospitals and imported remedies offered experimental relief. Across classes, women often bore disproportionate burdens, from caregiving to social stigma. You consider the human costs beyond mortality: economic instability, psychological stress, and altered social relationships. Epidemics expose vulnerability, yet also provoke ingenuity, fostering networks of support and adaptive behaviors that persist long after the immediate crisis passes. Days at sea permit reflection on medical evolution. Physicians increasingly rely on careful observation, recording symptoms, treatments, and outcomes. You recall Dr. Laker in London meticulously tabulating cases, Dr. Rodriguez in Lisbon integrating remedies from 4 continents, and Dr. Villalobos in Seville tracking recurrence patterns over years. Across borders, Renaissance medicine shifts toward empirical, evidence-based approaches, even if theories of causation remain incomplete. Mercury's dangers, guacacum's promise, and herbal decoctions' efficacy illustrate that experimentation and adaptation often surpass classical dogma in practical utility. Cultural adaptation is equally evident. In Venice, public health measures were methodical. In Paris, Rouen, and rural France, communal and familial support dominated. In England, parishes and guilds mitigated exposure. In Iberia, religious observance intertwined with globalized medical experimentation. Artists incorporate epidemic symbols into religious and secular works, while popular prints disseminate advice, satire, and moral instruction. Across continents, society absorbs the epidemic's lessons visually, orally, and institutionally, integrating the crisis into the very fabric of civic, religious, and familial life. You observe that social hierarchies consistently shape epidemic experience. Nobles maintain privacy, affording imported treatments and mercury chambers. Urban middle classes adopt preventive hygiene and dietary adjustments, accessing moderately costly remedies. The working poor rely on barber surgeons, herbal preparations, and community aid. The destitute endure neglect, with only charity or hospital wards offering minimal relief. Women, children, and enslaved populations suffer disproportionately, highlighting persistent inequities. Yet even in extreme adversity, adaptive behaviors emerge: communal labor sharing, practical herbal remedies, and observation-guided modifications to treatment protocols. The winter gales lash the ship, and you recall the Iberian physicians' debates on origins. Columbus' voyages offered one explanation. Archaeological evidence suggests pre-existing European forms, complicating simplistic narratives. Across Europe, intellectual ferment accompanies the epidemic. Classical authorities are questioned, observational methods gain credibility, and empirical evidence challenges long-held dogma. Epidemic diseases accelerate knowledge evolution, forcing societies to reconcile fear, superstition, and observation. You ponder the dynamic interplay between human curiosity, mortality, and social adaptation, seeing patterns that resonate across centuries. Shipboard, you converse with merchants and sailors about trade and epidemic risk. Ports function as hubs for both commerce and contagion. Sailors' practical knowledge complements physician observations, contributing to emergent public health measures. Isolation, hygiene, and timely removal of the sick become informal but effective strategies. You note that knowledge circulates not only through universities and print but also through lived experience, oral networks, apprenticeship, and maritime practice. These distributed systems of epidemic intelligence are often as vital as formal scholarship in mitigating disease impact. At dusk, the Atlantic horizon glows golden, and you reflect on the human story revealed across Italy, Germany, France, England, and Iberia. Epidemics cross boundaries indiscriminately, yet responses are shaped by social structures, resources, and culture. Communities adapt through observation, practical interventions, and institutional development. Knowledge accumulates gradually, forming the basis for modern epidemiology and medicine. The French disease exemplifies the dual nature of crises, amplifying vulnerability while simultaneously catalyzing innovation, empathy, and resilience. You feel the profound continuity of human struggle and ingenuity. Land approaches. The Portuguese coast rises from the Atlantic, golden cliffs and olive groves stretching to the horizon. The harbor of Lisbon reappears, bustling with sailors, merchants, and dockworkers. You disembark, reflecting on the contrasts between seafaring cities and inland towns. Coastal hubs are exposed to both trade and disease, yet benefit from imported remedies and early knowledge of outbreaks. Inland villages rely on communal resilience and traditional remedies. The epidemic exposes disparities in access and outcome, but also reveals universal human traits: ingenuity, cooperation, and a drive to survive. You revisit Sonora Cardoso, noting changes since your first arrival. African and Indian traders interact openly in markets. Knowledge of exotic remedies spreads more widely. Discussions turn to guacacum and sarsapilla, whose integration into local treatments exemplifies Portugal's unique position at the crossroads of global exchange. Observing hospital care, you see both continuity and innovation. Clean bedding, dietary management, and isolation continue, but experimental imported remedies are applied systematically. Physicians increasingly maintain detailed records, marking a nascent epidemiological method. A visit to All Saints Royal Hospital confirms how social hierarchy shapes outcomes. Wealthy patients occupy private rooms, receive exotic remedies, and enjoy physician attention. The working poor receive simpler treatments, often relying on herbal decoctions or moderate mercury use. Enslaved Africans and marginalized groups face minimal care, highlighting inequities exacerbated by race, class, and social status. Yet even among the poorest, communal networks offer survival strategies. You note the recurring theme: epidemics do not respect boundaries, but society's responses are heavily stratified. Conversations with sailors emphasize maritime experience as informal medical knowledge. Crew members track outbreaks, isolate the ill, and apply practical remedies from ports across Europe and Africa. These observations supplement formal learning, creating a distributed intelligence network. Stories of lost shipmates, successful quarantines, and improvised herbal treatments reveal a pragmatic approach to disease control. Oral tradition and apprenticeship function as essential complements to written scholarship, particularly in a world of evolving epidemics and limited centralized authority. Traveling overland to Seville, the Andalusian landscape impresses with olive groves, fortified towns, and Roman aqueducts. Conversations with merchants and scholars highlight Spanish adaptation to the French disease. Hospitals in Seville accommodate the afflicted, while physicians employ guacacum, dietary measures, and moderate mercury use. Religious rituals remain intertwined with medical practice. Processions, prayers, and masses for the sick coexist with empirical observation, illustrating how faith and science coexist in early 16th century Europe. At the Casa de Contratación in Seville, you glimpse documents on early voyages to the Americas. Logs note crew illness. Letters describe post-voyage symptoms recognizable as the French disease. The connection between exploration and epidemic spread is debated. Physicians and scholars discuss the origins, considering both pre-existing European cases and infections acquired overseas. Empirical observation begins to challenge received wisdom, while debates among learned men, diplomats, and explorers reveal the interplay between global trade, travel, and disease transmission. Meeting Dr. Francisco López de Villalobos at the University of Seville, you explore clinical approaches to the epidemic. He emphasizes careful observation, longitudinal case recording, and combined treatments of guacacum and moderate mercury. Recurrence patterns complicate diagnosis, yet detailed case histories enable better prognosis. Social observation complements medical practice. Nobles receive privacy, urban middle classes moderate lifestyles, and the poor rely on communal or institutional support. Spain's American connections allow early access to exotic remedies, influencing outcomes and informing comparative studies. You interview Rodrigo Díaz, an elderly veteran of Columbus' first voyage. He recounts sailors falling ill months after returning, some recovering, others suffering lifelong consequences. He observes Caribbean remedies, such as bark and leaf infusions for skin ailments, sometimes outperforming European treatments. These empirical insights cross oceans, gradually integrating into Iberian medical practice. The human element of storytelling, survivors sharing experiences, proves as crucial as physician observation in shaping adaptive responses to the epidemic. Autumn deepens in Seville. You observe hospitals, religious institutions, and domestic care, noting patterns familiar across Europe: empirical adaptation, social stratification, communal support, and persistent stigma. Public health measures, clean water, isolation, hygiene, coexist with spiritual interventions. Scholars debate origins, practitioners refine treatments, and communities adjust behavior. Epidemics, you realize, accelerate both social and intellectual evolution, challenging authority, encouraging experimentation, and fostering networks of knowledge that span continents. Preparing to return home, you reflect on the cumulative lessons of your journey. From Naples to Iberia, Italy to England, rural villages to bustling ports, the French disease reveals a universal human narrative: fear, suffering, adaptation, and innovation. Empirical observation gradually reshapes medical practice. Social institutions evolve to accommodate the vulnerable. Communal resilience offsets limited resources. The epidemic becomes a force not only of destruction but of knowledge, shaping medicine, public health, and society in ways that will persist for centuries, foreshadowing modern approaches to disease and care. The ship sails from Seville with favorable winds, carrying spices, gold, and European passengers eager to return home. You spend the voyage reflecting on what you have seen. Epidemics are not mere biological events, but social catalysts. Patterns emerge across nations, Initial panic and scapegoating, adaptation through observation and experience, reliance on communal or institutional support, and persistent inequities in access to care. From merchants in Lisbon to villagers in England, human ingenuity and resilience persist amid suffering. Crossing the Atlantic coastlines, you watch Portuguese ports fade into the distance. Crew and passengers exchange stories of European outbreaks, noting differences in response and remedies. Practical wisdom circulates through oral tradition and apprenticeship, complementing formal scholarship. The global movement of goods and people ensures diseases travel quickly, but also allows the exchange of medical knowledge and remedies. The epidemic is a vector not only of illness but of learning, shaping emerging scientific networks across Europe and beyond. Returning through northern Spain, you observe towns adjusting daily life to prevent contagion. Markets stagger hours to avoid crowding. Public baths modify practices. Clergy counsel moderation and prayer alongside hygiene. Even in small villages, lessons from urban centers diffuse slowly but steadily. Rural communities develop localized remedies, often herbal, sometimes borrowed from returning travelers. Epidemics catalyze adaptation in both medicine and society, a slow but cumulative process shaping behavior, institutions, and collective knowledge. Crossing into France once again, you note how the epidemic has persisted in both urban and rural areas. In Rouen and smaller towns, public health measures continue: hospices for the poor, hygiene regulations for bathhouses, oversight of barber surgeons. The disease maintains its grip, yet mortality is reduced where institutional frameworks and communal support exist. Observation and record-keeping are increasingly systematic. Physicians compare notes across cities. Treatments evolve through trial and error. Human response begins to match disease with both practical and intellectual effort. In northern Italy, you revisit cities first touched by the outbreak 7 years earlier. Venice, Padua, Florence, all show the enduring influence of the epidemic. Public health regulations, hospital innovations, and physician networks remain in place. Communities treat the disease as a chronic feature rather than a sudden catastrophe. Young apprentices learn barber surgery and herbal remedies alongside formal instruction. Even art reflects adaptation. Saints associated with healing, symbolic representations of suffering, and moralized depictions of disease populate churches and print shops. Observing rural Italy, you notice enduring practices. Communal labor persists despite illness. Neighbors care for those too weak to work. Herbal remedies and practical knowledge dominate where formal medicine cannot reach. Villagers recount painful lessons from failed treatments, learning to avoid harmful overuse of mercury. Adaptation emerges from suffering, observation, and collaboration. Religious intercession remains vital, but practical measures accompany faith, illustrating how culture, knowledge, and environment intersect in response to epidemic crises. Traveling through Germany, you witness a patchwork of responses shaped by political fragmentation. Free cities like Nuremberg implement hygiene regulations, quarantine measures, and public record-keeping. Rural principalities rely on local physicians or herbalists. Differences in governance, wealth, and urban density produce distinct patterns of disease impact and response. The epidemic highlights both the potential of coordinated policy and the fragility of decentralized societies facing contagious threats, emphasizing lessons for future public health strategies. In France, revisiting Paris and countryside, you see the persistence of knowledge networks. Physicians maintain detailed observations, barber surgeons refine practical treatments, communal support systems continue in villages. Religious practices adapt, prayers for protection coexist with recommendations for isolation and hygiene. Social rituals, greetings, and communal habits have permanently shifted. Even when the disease is not immediately present, behavior has changed. Epidemics leave enduring cultural and social imprints beyond direct mortality. Returning to England, London remains alive with trade, though scarred by recurring outbreaks. Hospitals like Bart's continue to provide care, and physicians systematically record symptoms, treatment outcomes, and social patterns. Practical medicine increasingly relies on empiricism, careful observation, longitudinal study, and experimentation with both European and exotic remedies. Social structures, guilds, parishes, charitable institutions, moderate suffering, yet inequality persists. The epidemic has reshaped expectations about public and private responsibility for health. Crossing back into Portugal, Lisbon's global commerce is thriving. Physicians integrate African, Indian, and American remedies, experimenting and documenting results. Hospitals maintain isolation wards, herbal treatments, and dietary regimens. Social and economic stratification determines access, yet communal networks, religious institutions, and practical knowledge mitigate suffering. Observation of patterns, careful record-keeping, and experience-based experimentation are hallmarks of this era's emergent medical science. The epidemic has accelerated Europe's empirical and global approach to medicine. In Seville, you review accumulated knowledge of the epidemic, recurrence patterns, social responses, treatment innovations, and cultural adaptations. Physicians and scholars discuss long-term implications, the importance of accurate record-keeping, systematic observation, and global exchange of remedies. Political and religious institutions adjust regulations, balancing containment with commerce and social stability. Epidemics become a lens through which communities measure both vulnerability and resilience, prompting reflection on human capacity to endure, adapt, and learn. Reflecting on your journey across Europe, you see recurring themes: initial fear and blame, incremental adaptation, stratified access to care, communal support, and the emergence of empirical approaches. The French disease has catalyzed institutional development, hospitals, hospices, guild oversight, and public health measures. It has accelerated medical innovation and global exchange of remedies. Cultural adaptations, from altered social rituals to religious observances, demonstrate the pervasive influence of epidemics beyond purely medical domains. In Iberia, the legacy of maritime exploration and trade is evident in medical practice. Imported remedies from Africa, India, and the Americas provide options previously unavailable. Physicians integrate observation-based approaches with traditional European knowledge, creating hybrid systems. Hospitals, charitable institutions, and guilds mediate social inequalities, though access remains uneven. Epidemics underscore the interdependence of local practice and global knowledge, revealing the early stages of an interconnected medical worldview that spans continents. The return voyage home offers reflection. Epidemics are both destructive and generative. Mortality and suffering coexist with knowledge creation, institutional adaptation, and cultural transformation. Practical experience, social cohesion, and empirical observation are key to managing disease. Across Europe, responses vary by geography, governance, wealth, and culture, but the human capacity to adapt, innovate, and care for one another emerges as a constant. Epidemics shape history not only through death but through adaptation and resilience. Back on familiar shores, you notice that communities have internalized lessons from the past 7 years. Public health measures persist, hospitals operate with refined protocols, guilds and parishes continue support networks, and empiricism increasingly informs medical practice. Social hierarchies remain, yet knowledge and innovation offer some mitigation. Cultural practices, greetings, hygiene, communal interactions reflect permanent behavioral change. The French disease has left an indelible mark on European society, shaping medicine, policy, and daily life alike. You reflect on the interplay between epidemic disease and human ingenuity. While the French disease caused widespread suffering, it also accelerated the development of systematic observation, clinical documentation, and empirical experimentation. Communities learned to adapt behavior, improve hygiene, and organize care for vulnerable populations. Trade and exploration facilitated access to remedies from distant lands. Epidemics are thus agents of both disruption and innovation, highlighting humanity's dual role as both susceptible organism and active problem solver. In rural villages, you see enduring patterns: communal support for the sick, practical experimentation with herbal remedies, and reliance on religious and moral frameworks alongside pragmatic measures. Children assume new responsibilities, neighbors assist laborers incapacitated by illness, and families innovate to survive. Epidemics reinforce social cohesion in some contexts while exposing inequalities in others. These adaptations, though born of necessity, demonstrate resilience and the capacity of human societies to endure repeated biological and social stressors. Across urban centers, hospitals continue evolving, incorporating exotic remedies and systematic observation. Physicians debate, experiment, and record results, advancing empirical knowledge. Public health measures become normalized. Bathhouse regulations, quarantine procedures, dietary guidelines, and hygiene campaigns. Civic and religious institutions mediate disparities in access. The epidemic demonstrates that structured institutions, empirical practice, and social networks collectively enhance societal capacity to respond to disease. Reflecting on the long-term significance of the epidemic, you recognize a broader lesson. Epidemics transform societies in multifaceted ways. They catalyze medical innovation, reshape social norms, influence art and literature, and leave lasting behavioral and institutional legacies. Disease is both biological and social, a force that reveals human vulnerability and ingenuity. The French disease, like previous and subsequent epidemics, demonstrates the intertwined nature of suffering and adaptation in the historical human experience. As you finally return home, your journey across Europe and the Iberian Peninsula leaves a lasting impression. The French disease has exposed the fragility and resilience of societies, the limits and promise of medical knowledge, and the persistent inequalities that shape human experience. Yet it also illuminates humanity's capacity for innovation, cooperation, and adaptation. Epidemics leave scars, but they also teach, spur observation, and accelerate progress. Your observations offer a comprehensive portrait of a world reshaped by disease, from the streets of Paris to the harbors of Lisbon, forever altered yet enduring. As the ship cuts through the waves on the journey home, you look back at the lands you have crossed: Italy, Germany, France, England, Portugal, Spain, each shaped in its own way by the shadow of the French disease. 7 years have passed since the first outbreak, yet life endures. Streets bustle, markets hum, communities support their sick, and physicians continue to observe, record, and experiment. The disease remains, but so does human resilience. Epidemics are more than mortality, they are mirrors of society. They reveal fear and cruelty, but also compassion and ingenuity. They expose inequality, yet foster cooperation. They devastate, yet catalyze knowledge. The French disease has left scars on bodies, families, cities, and institutions, but it has also accelerated understanding, shaping medicine, social practices, and collective memory. From humble village cottages to grand city hospitals, from herbal remedies to imported guacacum, from whispered prayers to public regulations, you have witnessed the ways humanity adapts, survives, and learns. The world is forever changed, yet life persists. The shadows of epidemic and exploration intertwine, reminding us of our fragility and our enduring capacity to respond. And as you stand at the rail, watching distant shores fade into the horizon, one truth becomes clear: disease shapes history, but so too does human courage, observation, and care. Our vulnerability is real, but so is our ability to endure, innovate, and adapt. The story continues, as it always will.